The laughter started the moment she bowed onto the mat. White belt, perfect hair, makeup still intact. "This isn't a beauty pageant, sweetheart," Marcus Kane sneered. "The man who hadn't lost a fight in 4 years. Maybe try yoga instead." The other black belts joined in, pointing at her pristine GI, her manicured nails, her complete lack of calluses. She said nothing, just took her position. They had no idea they were looking at a woman who had survived Navy SEAL training that broke most men. Welcome to Quiet Tale Studio. Before we begin this story of hidden strength and quiet power, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe that true warriors come in all forms, hit that subscribe button and help us share these incredible tales. The Midwest Regional Karate Championship was held in the same gymnasium it had occupied for the past 15 years. Faded yellow walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed slightly, and the distinct smell of sweat and floor wax that marked every serious martial arts venue in America. By 8 a.m., the place was already buzzing with controlled energy. Black belts stretched with the fluid precision of athletes who had spent years perfecting their bodies into weapons. Brown belts shadowboxed, running through kata with mechanical repetition. The sound of hands and feet striking heavy bags echoed through the space like distant thunder. Marcus Kane dominated the center of the main practice area like he owned it. At 34, he possessed the kind of physical presence that made people step aside without conscious thought. 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle, developed through a decade of serious training and 4 years of tournament dominance. His black belt was worn and faded, not from washing but from use. 67-0, his training partner Mike Chen said, adjusting his own black belt. "Think anyone here can even make you sweat?" Marcus didn't smile. He never smiled before competition. Same faces, same techniques, same predictable outcomes. These regional tournaments are becoming charity work. Around them, other competitors were beginning their warm-up routines. The usual mix of serious martial artists, weekend warriors trying to prove something, and the occasional overconfident newcomer who'd watched too many movies. That's when she walked in. Sarah Matthews entered the gymnasium like she was attending a business meeting rather than a martial arts tournament. At 29, she possessed the kind of striking beauty that made conversation stop mid-sentence. Auburn hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, steel blue eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing, and features that belonged on magazine covers rather than competition mats. But it was her uniform that caused the real stir. Pristine white GI, pressed and spotless. White belt tied with military precision. No patches, no school insignia, no indication of where or how she trained. The laughter started quietly, then spread across the gymnasium like ripples on water. "You've got to be kidding me," someone muttered. "Did she get lost looking for the yoga studio? Check out the manicure. Think she's worried about breaking a nail?" Sarah heard every comment, registered every stare, and continued toward the registration table with the same calm bearing she'd maintained through situations far more challenging than teenage black belts with fragile egos. Marcus watched her approach with the kind of predatory interest a shark might show a seal. Fresh meat, someone new to humiliate. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying across the gymnasium, "I think you might be in the wrong place. This is a full-contact tournament, not a demonstration." Sarah stopped, turned to face him, and for a moment the entire gymnasium fell silent. When she spoke, her voice was clear, steady, and completely unimpressed. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The response wasn't what Marcus had expected. No nervousness, no backing down, no explanation or apology. Just calm certainty that somehow made him more irritated rather than less. "Listen, sweetheart," he said, stepping closer, using his height advantage to intimidate. "This isn't a beauty pageant. These guys have been training for years. You're going to get hurt." Sarah's steel blue eyes met his without flinching. "I appreciate your concern." Mike Chen snorted with laughter. "Appreciate his concern? Lady, this man hasn't lost a fight in 4 years, 67 consecutive victories. You might want to reconsider." "Maybe try yoga instead," Marcus added, his tone carrying the casual cruelty of someone used to being the biggest predator in the room. The suggestion brought renewed laughter from the assembled black belts. Sarah absorbed it all with the same calm expression, then simply turned and continued toward the registration table. The tournament director, Frank Morales, had been running martial arts competitions for 20 years. He'd seen every type of competitor imaginable, from legitimate masters to delusional amateurs who thought their backyard training qualified them for serious competition. Sarah Matthews fell into a category he'd never encountered. "Name?" Frank asked, not looking up from his clipboard. "Sarah Matthews." "School affiliation?" "Independent." Frank glanced up. Beautiful woman, white belt, no obvious training background. This was either going to be very quick or very ugly. "Ma'am, I have to ask, what's your competition experience?" "Sufficient for today's requirements." The answer was polite, but completely uninformative. Frank tried a different approach. "How long have you been training?" Sarah considered the question. How did she explain that her training included surviving Hell Week, advanced combat tactics, and classified operations that most people didn't have clearance to know existed? "Several years." Frank sighed. Every year, a few people showed up thinking martial arts tournaments were like the movies, usually men with oversized egos and undersized skills. Occasionally, women who'd taken a few self-defense classes and developed unrealistic confidence. "Look, Miss Matthews, this is a full-contact tournament. These are serious competitors. I'd hate to see you get injured." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I'll sign whatever waivers are necessary." From across the gymnasium, Marcus Kane's voice carried clearly. "Just put her in the novice division, Frank. She'll last about 30 seconds before she realizes this is an aerobics class." More laughter. Sarah completed her registration forms with the same methodical precision she'd once used to complete mission briefings in situations where mistakes got people killed. The tournament bracket was posted 20 minutes later. Sarah found her name in the women's open division. Not novice, but the main competition bracket alongside brown and black belts with years of tournament experience. Marcus Kane was listed in the men's open division, seated first, as expected. "You sure about this, miss?" Frank asked quietly, approaching Sarah as she studied the bracket. "It's not too late to withdraw." Sarah turned those steel blue eyes toward him. "I'm sure." What Frank couldn't see were the scars hidden beneath her makeup, the surgery scars from shrapnel wounds earned during classified operations, the small marks left by training so intense that it broke most people who attempted it. What he also couldn't see was the calm that came from someone who had faced real violence. Not the controlled aggression of tournament fighting, but the life-or-death situations where hesitation meant death, and skills were measured not in points or trophies, but in who went home alive. Sarah found a quiet corner to stretch and prepare. Her warm-up routine looked like standard martial arts preparation, but every movement carried the precision of someone whose life had once depended on physical readiness. Around her, the black belts continued their own preparation, occasionally glancing over with expressions ranging from amusement to condescension. A few offered unsolicited advice about tournament strategy or suggested she might want to observe a few matches before competing herself. Sarah listened politely, said little, and continued her preparation with the same methodical approach she'd once used to prepare for missions that officially didn't exist. Same amidst, the tournament began with lower-ranked divisions, working up toward the main events. Sarah's first match was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. against Jennifer Walsh, a brown belt from a respected local school. Jennifer was everything a traditional martial artist should be: technically sound, properly trained, with 3 years of tournament experience and a record of consistent, if not spectacular, performance. She was also 22 years old and completely convinced that the beautiful woman in the white belt was about to provide her with an easy victory. "Nothing personal," Jennifer said as they bowed onto the mat, "but you really should have started in the novice division." Sarah bowed with perfect form and took her fighting stance. Her posture was relaxed but ready, balanced in a way that looked almost casual. The referee called for the match to begin. Jennifer attacked immediately, launching a textbook combination, front kick to create distance, followed by a reverse punch aimed at the solar plexus. Clean technique, proper form, exactly what her instructors had taught her. Sarah moved like water. The kick passed through empty air as Sarah shifted slightly to the side. The punch followed the same path as Sarah seemed to flow around the attack without apparent effort. Before Jennifer could reset her guard, Sarah's counterattack arrived. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't complicated, it was simply perfect. A single strike to a pressure point that Jennifer's instructors had mentioned in passing but never emphasized. Precise, controlled, and delivered with the kind of clinical efficiency that spoke of training far beyond what any civilian dojo could provide. Jennifer dropped to one knee, gasping, her vision blurring from a perfectly placed nerve strike that shut down her nervous system for exactly 3 seconds. The match was over. The gymnasium fell silent. Even the conversations in the stands stopped as people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. "Winner, Matthews," the referee announced, though his voice carried a note of confusion. Sarah bowed to her opponent, helped Jennifer to her feet, and walked off the mat with the same calm expression she'd worn since entering the building. Jennifer stood unsteadily, looking around the gymnasium like she'd just woken up from a dream. What happened? Marcus Kane had been casually observing from across the room, expecting to watch an entertaining mismatch. Now he found himself studying Sarah Matthews with considerably more interest. "Lucky shot," he told Mike Chen. Probably some pressure point nonsense she learned in a self-defense class. But his voice carried less certainty than his words suggested. Sarah's second match drew a much larger crowd. Word had spread quickly through the tournament about the white belt who dropped the brown belt with a single strike. Most people had reasonable explanations. Lucky hit, fluke technique, opponent caught off guard. Her opponent this time was Tony Rodriguez, a second-degree black belt with 8 years of tournament experience and a reputation for aggressive physical fighting. Tony wasn't taking any chances. He'd watched footage of Sarah's first match on someone's phone and decided the best strategy was to overwhelm her before she could attempt whatever trick she'd used on Jennifer. "No more games, lady," he said as they bowed onto the mat. "Time to see what you're really made of." Sarah nodded politely and took her stance. The referee started the match, and Tony exploded forward with a barrage of techniques designed to end the fight immediately. Punches, kicks, and grappling attempts thrown with the kind of intensity that had overwhelmed dozens of previous opponents. Sarah moved through his attacks like she was dancing. Every punch missed by inches, every kick found only air. When Tony attempted to grab her, she seemed to simply not be where his hands expected her to be. The crowd began to realize they were watching something unusual. Sarah's defensive movement wasn't standard tournament footwork. It was too fluid, too instinctive, too perfectly adapted to each specific attack. She moved like someone who had learned to fight not in a controlled dojo environment, but in situations where being touched meant injury or death. After 30 seconds of fruitless aggression, Tony stepped back, breathing heavily, confusion replacing confidence. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Sarah's response was a combination that lasted exactly 1.7 seconds. 2 strikes. The first to disable his guard, the second to a specific point on his ribcage that dropped him to the mat instantly. Not unconscious, not seriously injured, but completely incapacitated by precision strikes to nerve clusters that most martial artists didn't know existed. The gymnasium erupted. "Did you see that? How did she do that? Who is this woman?" Marcus Kane was no longer watching casually. He stood at the edge of the competition area, studying Sarah's technique with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for serious opponents. "Mike," he said quietly, "that wasn't luck." Mike Chen nodded slowly. "Those weren't tournament techniques either. I've never seen anything like that movement pattern." Sarah helped Tony to his feet, bowed respectfully, and walked off the mat. She found a quiet corner to wait for her next match, apparently unaffected by the growing attention she was receiving. What the crowd couldn't see was the slight adjustment she made to her makeup, covering a scar that had shifted slightly during the fight. A scar from training that had prepared her for violence far more serious than anything a tournament could provide. By her third match, Sarah Matthews had the undivided attention of everyone in the gymnasium. Videos of her previous fights were being shared on social media, generating comments that ranged from amazement to accusations of staged matches. Her opponent was David Kim, a third-degree black belt and former state champion. Unlike the previous competitors, David approached the match with serious preparation. He'd spent 30 minutes studying video of Sarah's fights, looking for patterns, weaknesses, or clues about her training background. What he found was more disturbing than helpful. "Frank," he said to the tournament director before the match, "where did this woman train? Her technique doesn't match any style I recognize." Frank Morales had been wondering the same thing. She registered as independent, no school affiliation listed. That's not possible. Nobody learns to move like that without serious institutional training. David wasn't wrong. Sarah's defensive patterns showed influence from multiple martial arts disciplines, but they were adapted and modified in ways that suggested training with a very specific purpose. Not points or trophies, but survival. The match began with David employing a much more cautious strategy. Instead of rushing in, he circled, probed, tested Sarah's reactions with minimal commitment. What he discovered was unsettling. Sarah didn't just counter his attacks, she anticipated them. Her defensive positioning seemed to account for possibilities he hadn't even considered yet. When he feinted left, she was already compensating for the real attack he was planning to throw right. It was like fighting someone who could read his mind. After 2 minutes of careful engagement, David attempted his signature technique, a spinning back kick that had won him 3 state championships. He'd practiced the setup thousands of times, and it had never failed against serious opposition. Sarah moved before he started spinning. She flowed to the outside of his rotation, struck twice while he was committed to the technique, and had resumed her fighting stance before David realized his kick had missed entirely. He found himself face down on the mat, disabled by strikes so precise that he hadn't felt them until after they'd taken effect. The gymnasium fell into stunned silence. David stood slowly, looking at Sarah with something approaching awe. "Who are you?" Sarah met his gaze with those steel blue eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience no civilian should possess. Someone who learned to fight in places where losing meant more than losing a match. The answer sent whispers through the crowd. A few people began putting together clues that pointed toward possibilities none of them wanted to consider. Marcus Kane approached the mat as Sarah walked off. For the first time in 4 years, he was looking at an opponent who might actually present a challenge. Well, he said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "Looks like we finally have some real competition." Sarah turned to face him. "Mr. Kane, you know who I am. Everyone knows who you are." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. 4 years undefeated, 67 consecutive victories. Think you can make it 67-1? Sarah studied him with the same calm assessment she'd once used to evaluate hostile targets in classified operational environments. "We'll find out." The tournament had reached its culmination. Men's and women's open divisions had been whittled down to their final matches, and the gymnasium was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread beyond the martial arts community about the mysterious white belt, who was systematically dismantling experienced black belts with techniques nobody could identify. Marcus Kane's path to the final had been typically dominant. 3 matches, 3 overwhelming victories, no points scored against him. He dispatched his opponents with the kind of clinical efficiency that had made him a regional legend. But for the first time in years, the crowd wasn't focused entirely on his performance. Sarah Matthews had become the tournament's main attraction. Her semifinal match against Lisa Chen, a 4th-degree black belt and former national competitor, had lasted 8 seconds. 8 seconds of movement so perfectly controlled that it looked more like a demonstration than a fight. Now, as tournament officials prepared for the final matches, an unusual situation had developed. "Frank," said Robert Nash, the head judge, "we have a problem." Frank Morales looked up from his scoring sheets. "What kind of problem?" "The final brackets. Matthews won the women's division, Kane won the men's, but the crowd is calling for them to fight each other." Frank considered the situation. Traditional tournament structure called for separate men's and women's divisions, but nothing in the rules specifically prohibited cross-gender matches if both competitors agreed. "What does Matthews say?" "She says she'll fight whoever needs to be fought." "And Kane?" Robert Nash smiled grimly. He's been asking for the match since her second fight. The announcement brought a roar from the crowd that shook the gymnasium rafters. Sarah Matthews versus Marcus Kane, the mysterious white belt against the undefeated champion. They met in the center of the mat for final instructions. Up close, the contrast was dramatic. Marcus towered over Sarah by 8 inches and outweighed her by at least 60 pounds. His black belt was faded from years of use, while her white belt remained pristine. "Last chance to back out, sweetheart," Marcus said quietly. "I don't go easy on anyone, regardless of gender." Sarah looked up at him with those steel blue eyes that had remained calm through situations far more dangerous than anything Marcus Kane could imagine. "Neither do I." The referee called them to their positions. The gymnasium fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of a few hundred people holding their breath. "Fighters ready?" Sarah took her stance, relaxed, balanced, ready. Marcus assumed his position, aggressive, confident, predatory. "Fight!" Marcus attacked immediately, launching a combination designed to overwhelm Sarah before she could establish any rhythm. He'd watched her previous matches and decided the key was constant pressure, giving her no time to set up whatever mysterious technique she'd been using. His first punch passed through empty air. His second punch found nothing but space. His third punch was intercepted by a counterattack that arrived so quickly he didn't see it coming. Sarah had moved like smoke, flowing around his aggression and responding with surgical precision. Marcus felt the strike land, felt his balance shift, felt his confident attack plan crumble in the space of a heartbeat. But unlike her previous opponents, Marcus Kane had 4 years of championship experience. He adapted quickly, resetting his guard and changing his strategy mid-fight. What followed was a chess match conducted at combat speed. Marcus brought power, reach, and experience. Sarah brought something else entirely: movement patterns that seemed to violate the laws of physics, defensive capabilities that made his best techniques look clumsy, and counterattacks that found openings he didn't know existed. For 2 minutes, they engaged in a level of martial arts that most of the crowd had never witnessed. Marcus threw everything he'd learned in a decade of serious training. Sarah responded with capabilities that came from training beyond anything any civilian martial arts school could provide. Gradually, inevitably, the tide turned. Sarah wasn't just defending against Marcus's attacks, she was controlling them, redirecting his aggression, using his power against him, maneuvering him into positions where his size and strength became disadvantages rather than assets. The end came with a technique so subtle that half the crowd missed it. Marcus committed to a powerful kick that should have ended the match. Sarah moved slightly to the side, allowed the kick to pass, and struck him twice while he was recovering his balance. Marcus Kane, undefeated champion, 67 consecutive victories, found himself staring up at the gymnasium ceiling while a woman in a white belt stood calmly above him. The crowd erupted in chaos. The gymnasium had emptied except for a few dozen people who couldn't quite bring themselves to leave. Sarah Matthews sat quietly in a corner, still wearing her pristine white GI, still apparently unaffected by having just defeated the region's most dominant martial artist. Marcus Kane approached her slowly, moving carefully due to the residual effects of whatever technique she'd used to end their match. "I need to know," he said quietly. "Who are you, really?" Sarah looked up at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity and something approaching respect. Someone who learned that real fighting isn't about tournaments or trophies. "Where did you train?" Sarah considered the question. How much truth could she reveal without compromising operational security that might still matter? "Naval Special Warfare Command, Coronado, California." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone within hearing distance turned toward their conversation. "You're saying you're Navy?" "Was Navy, SEAL Team 5. Marcus sat down heavily next to her. "That's not possible. Women can't." "Women couldn't," Sarah corrected, "until recently. I was part of a classified integration program. Turns out some of us could not only handle the training but excel at it." Frank Morales approached them, his expression a mixture of amazement and concern. Miss Matthews, if what you're saying is true, why are you here? Why enter a civilian tournament? Sarah's still blue eyes grew distant, focusing on memories of places and situations these people would never have clearance to understand. Because sometimes you need to remember that the skills you learned in dark places can be used for something other than violence. Sometimes you need to prove to yourself that you're still human. She paused, then looked around at the assembled martial artists who were hanging on every word. And sometimes you get tired of people assuming that because you're beautiful, you must be helpless. Marcus shook his head slowly. SEAL training. That explains the movement patterns, the precision, the way you seemed to know what I was going to do before I did it. Combat training is different from tournament training, Sarah confirmed. When your life depends on technique, you learn differently. When missing means death, you practice differently. How many tours? Asked David Kim, who had approached quietly. 3. Iraq, Afghanistan, and places that officially don't exist. The gymnasium had become a classroom, with Sarah as an unexpected instructor, teaching lessons about the difference between martial arts as sport and martial arts as survival tool. What you do here is beautiful, she continued, gesturing toward the tournament mats. It's art, it's athletics, it's competition. What I learned was different. It was designed for situations where rules don't exist and referees aren't there to stop the fight. Mike Chen, who had been Marcus's training partner and closest friend in the tournament circuit, stepped forward. Why the white belt? If you have those skills, why not wear the rank you've earned? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the gymnasium 8 hours earlier. Because rank is about recognition within a system. I never trained within your system. I never learned your forms, never progressed through your curriculum, never tested for your belts. She stood, brushing off her GI with movements that carried unconscious military precision. Besides, wearing a white belt reminded me of something important. In real situations, it doesn't matter what color belt you wear. It only matters whether you can do what needs to be done. Epilogue. Respect earned. 6 months later, Sarah Matthews returned to the same gymnasium. This time, she wasn't entering a tournament. She was teaching a seminar on reality-based self-defense for traditional martial artists. The class was packed. Marcus Kane sat in the front row, having become one of her most dedicated students. His perspective on martial arts had fundamentally changed after their encounter, and he'd asked Sarah to help him understand the difference between fighting for points and fighting for survival. Traditional martial arts are beautiful, Sarah told the assembled students. They teach discipline, respect, technique, and philosophy, but they're designed for controlled environments with rules and referees. She demonstrated a technique, moving with the same fluid precision that had mesmerized the tournament crowd. What I learned was designed for uncontrolled environments where the only rule is survival. Neither approach is better or worse. They're different tools for different purposes. Frank Morales, who had become the tournament director at 3 additional venues after word spread about the legendary white belt match, approached her after the seminar. Sarah, I have to ask, do you ever miss it? The military life, the operations, the intensity. Sarah looked around the gymnasium filled with martial artists who had come to learn from her, people who showed her respect not because of her appearance or gender, but because of her capabilities. I miss the brotherhood. I miss the sense of purpose. I miss knowing that what you do matters in the most fundamental way possible. She paused, watching Marcus work with the newer student, patiently teaching the same techniques Sarah had used to defeat him. But I don't miss the violence. I don't miss the secrecy. And I don't miss the knowledge that every mission might be the last one. Frank nodded. And now? Now I teach people that strength comes in many forms, that assumptions are dangerous, that sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the person you should respect most. Sarah gathered her equipment, the same methodical approach she'd used for mission preparation in environments where organization meant survival. Besides, she added with a smile, someone needs to remind the martial arts community that warriors come in all packages, even white belts. As she walked toward the exit, past walls now decorated with photos from the legendary tournament 6 months earlier, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from classified operations to civilian competitions, to teaching the next generation of martial artists. She'd learned that the most important battles weren't always fought on classified battlefields against designated enemies. Sometimes they were fought in gymnasiums against assumptions, prejudices, and the limitations people placed on each other. And sometimes the greatest victory wasn't defeating an opponent, it was earning the respect of people who had initially dismissed you, and then using that respect to teach them something important about strength, capability, and the danger of judging anyone by their appearance. The woman who had once been underestimated because of her beauty and white belt had become a teacher, mentor, and reminder that in a world full of assumptions, the wisest approach was to respect everyone until they proved they didn't deserve it. Because sometimes the person you're laughing at is exactly the person who can teach you the most important lesson of your life. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their appearance, only to discover they possess capabilities you never imagined? Have you ever been dismissed or overlooked, only to prove that people's assumptions were completely wrong? Tell us your story in the comments, and let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to Quiet Tales Studio for more incredible stories of hidden strength, quiet warriors, and the power that comes from proving that assumptions are often our greatest weakness. Until next time, remember, never judge a warrior by their uniform. The most dangerous person in the room might be the one everyone else is ignoring. **.